Everyone's obsessed with boomer real estate and millennial avocado toast discourse. Gen Z gets entire think pieces about side hustles and burnout and financial anxiety. But there's a whole generation sitting quietly in the middle that nobody's talking about. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. Your coworker with more saved than most millennials will see in a decade, who still acts like they're one paycheck from disaster. Your uncle with 50 grand in the bank who still won't replace a 15-year-old car. The friend who drops real money on a concert but clips coupons at the grocery store the same week. None of this is random, and none of it is a personality quirk. This is the psychology behind Gen X money habits, and it comes down to one thing: financial trust issues that started decades before most of them ever opened a bank account. It traces back to a childhood most of them spent completely alone, and a series of broken promises that came right after. Picture 1979. You're 9 years old, and you let yourself into an empty house after school with a key on a string around your neck. Both your parents work now. That's new. That's the first generation where it's the norm instead of the exception. Nobody's home to check your homework or ask about your day. You make your own snack, you turn on the TV, you figure out what to do with 3 unsupervised hours before anyone gets back. By the time you're a teenager, you've been quietly managing yourself for years, and nobody ever sat you down to teach you how. Then, you watch the adults around you get the same lesson on a bigger scale. The steady pension your grandfather counted on was already disappearing by the time your parents needed one. And by the time it's your turn, that kind of guaranteed retirement is basically gone. That's the actual root of Gen X money psychology. Not a single bad recession, but an entire childhood, and the decades after it, of learning that nobody else is going to hold the safety net for you. Self-reliance wasn't a personality trait they chose. It was the only option they were ever given, and they've been running on it ever since. Contradiction number 1. The house believer who hates the market. Gen X bought their first homes right as the market was heading into the 2008 crash, and it hit them harder than almost anyone. At the worst point in 2010, roughly 1 in 7 Gen X homeowners owed more on their house than it was worth. By 2016, that number had fallen to just 3%. And Gen X ended up being the only generation to fully claw back the wealth the crash took from them. You'd think that would sour them on real estate for life. Instead, nearly 73% of Gen X owns a home today, one of the highest homeownership rates of any generation. The twist is what they don't trust: the market itself, the fund managers, the number that goes up and down on a screen. A house is tangible. You can stand in it, fix the roof yourself, watch the value slowly build with your own labor. The stock market is an abstraction that already lied to them once, and abstractions don't get a second chance. Contradiction number 2. The sandwich generation. Nobody prepared them for Gen X is quietly funding 2 households besides their own, their kids and their aging parents, often at the exact same time. Roughly half of adults in their 40s and 50s have given financial support to a grown child in the past year, and more than a quarter say they're that child's primary support. At the same time, about 1 in 5 are also financially supporting a parent 65 or older. Combined, sandwiched adults spend an average of over $10,000 and dozens of hours a month caring for both generations at once. This is a big reason Gen X can look simultaneously wealthy and stretched thin on paper. The money is real, but so are the obligations quietly pulling on it from both directions. They're not bad at saving. They're financing 3 generations at once and rarely mentioning it to anyone. If you want a one-line summary of sandwich generation finances, it's this: fully committed on paper, quietly stretched in real life. Contradiction number 3. Checks it the least, manages it the best. Here's the one that surprised even us. You'd expect the most anxious generation about money to be glued to their credit score. But Gen X checks their credit score less often than almost anyone. Well under a third do it monthly, compared to nearly half of millennials and Gen Z. And yet Gen X holds one of the strongest average credit scores of any generation, trailing only boomers. They're not obsessively monitoring the number. They're just quietly making the decisions that keep it high. And they don't need a notification to remind them. It's not indifference. It's the same self-reliance from childhood. If you already trust your own judgment, you don't need to check the receipt. Contradiction number 4. Card in the wallet, not in the hand. Gen X overwhelmingly has credit cards, Most of them have had one for decades. But more than a third say they actively prefer paying with cash or debit for everyday purchases, even with a credit card sitting right in their wallet. Flip the scenario to a real emergency, though, and the picture reverses. The majority say they have used, or would use, that same credit card as a financial backup when things go wrong. The card isn't a spending tool, it's a fire extinguisher, something you own, maintain, and hope you never actually need. Contradiction number 5. Trust no institution, stays at the same one for years. Here's the one that doesn't match the stereotype at all. Gen X grew up watching loyalty get punished. Parents downsized after 20 years, pensions cut, companies making promises they didn't keep. You'd expect that generation to treat every job like a rental, never fully unpacking, always halfway out the door. But by the numbers, Gen X actually sticks around. Recent labor data puts their average time with a single employer close to 8 years, in the same range as boomers, and well above workers in their 20s and early 30s. They don't stay because they trust the company. They stay because leaving and starting over has its own risk, and risk is exactly what they've spent their whole life trying to minimize. It's not loyalty. It's the same math as the mortgage versus the credit card. Commit to what's predictable and keep your guard up anyway. Add it up, and every one of these habits points the same direction. They believe in the house, not the market. They carry the weight of 2 households, mentioning it to almost no one. They trust their own judgment over a notification telling them to check a number. They keep the card in the wallet, but keep it in the drawer when it's time to pay. They stay at the job for years but never fully believe it will stay loyal back. None of this is contradiction for its own sake. It's one blueprint, built at 9 years old, applied 5 different ways by a generation that learned early that the only balance sheet you can fully trust is your own. Gen X isn't stuck in the middle by accident. They're the buffer, the generation absorbing financial shocks in both directions at once. Upward, caring for parents who trusted pensions and institutions that vanished. Downward, subsidizing kids trying to get a foothold in an economy that's harder than the one Gen X inherited. Nobody assigned them that role. They just noticed, the same way they noticed as 9-year-olds, that nobody else was going to do it for them. So they built an entire financial identity around one idea. If you can't count on anyone else to catch you, you build your own net. A paid-off sense of control, a credit score you don't need to check, a house you can stand inside, a card you hope to never actually use. Not because they're paranoid, because they've quietly been the safety net for 2 generations at once, and nobody ever asked if they wanted the job. Think about that coworker, that uncle, that friend from the start of this video. They're not contradictory. They're all running the exact same program. Built at 9 years old, with a key on a string, and never switched off since. Drop a comment. Which of these hit closest to home, or closest to someone in your life? Subscribe if you want the Millennials and Boomers episodes when they land.